the new SEC.
Welcome to the new SEC podcast. This is episode 28. We have reached week 14, the last regular season week of the season. Hunter, Rivalry week. How are we feeling?
It's bittersweet because it's the last week of regular season college football. Some teams are going to be playing bowl games, some conference games, but this is really the last hurrah. But this is the best week of football for a slate because it's rivalry week. Even teams that are maybe not projected to win or the spreads are real wide. When you play your rival, you're coming out with everything you got. So this is the week to expect some teams to put on something a little different.
It's definitely the week to expect teams to put something on different, like you mentioned. And it's rivalry week, so there's so many in-state rivals in the SEC, outside of the SEC. You know, a lot of times every year we're talking about the big game, Ohio State, Michigan. But in the SEC, we have the game, Texas versus Texas A&M. First time playing, I think, in over 10 years. This is one of the biggest games of the season, the biggest game in the conference, and it's going to determine who goes to the SEC championship. South Carolina, Clemson. That's a big one in the Palmetto State. You know something about the Carolinas. That's a huge, huge game for those two teams.
Huge. I mean, those two teams, I think that's just as much of a playoff game as any other. They're two teams that are looking for an at-large spot. They don't really control their destiny, but huge resume booster for whoever wins that one.
Huge resume booster. And Dabo Swinney, as you mentioned, is trying to crash the SEC Big Ten Invitational. So getting an SEC win, his first one of the season, could be big for Clemson. And for South Carolina, they'd love to take down their rival down there in Clemson as well. Big one. It spreads 2.5. And, I think he had talked about it. A lot of it probably is based upon Clemson being the home team for that spread number as of now.
Yeah. Probably would have been same spread the other way if it was, played at South Carolina. Two teams, I think they're pretty evenly matched. It'll be a good one that we're going to break down. Georgia Tech, Georgia. That's another one that could be a really sneaky good game.
Could be a really sneaky good game. Georgia Tech recently just beat NC State. They're sitting at 5th in the ACC, 7-4. And Georgia has been playing, some better football, but it's just, we don't know what Georgia will see. But right now they're sitting at number 6 in the AP. Big one for them. The spread's 19.5. So that's a huge one. Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl. Thoughts?
It's what it's all about for especially Auburn. They couldn't before they even made it off the field after storming. Players are already talking about getting a shot at Alabama and a successful season for more so for Auburn. If you can beat Alabama, then you had a good year. So expect the best game from them that you've seen. Alabama looking to bounce back a little bit, so it's a little tough to call what this one will look like.
It's definitely a tough one to call, and there's a lot on the line for that game, right? Auburn's been going after Alabama recruits. They've been trying to win the state of Alabama when it comes to recruiting. So this is huge for getting players to flip, getting players to want to go to Auburn, or getting players to stay at Alabama or want to go to Alabama. I mean, across the SEC, we got Tennessee, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt obviously started the season off hot. Tennessee is trying to, from what it looks like, keep their playoff spot intact without probably having to go to the SEC championship. So big one for them. And then, look around the conference from a rivalry perspective, the Egg Bowl, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, no matter what the records are, that's always going to be an entertaining, gritty game. Spreads 26.5 there. Florida State, that's big for DJ Lagway and the team over there for Florida and Billy Napier. Louisville and Kentucky, even in Kentucky's best or worst years, they're always able to give Louisville a game, and they've won a good amount in the past couple of years. And, Louisville, of course, a pretty solid team in the ACC. So there's a lot of good rivalries, both in the conference with some of the games we talked about and some of the out of conference, but in-state games like Florida State, and like Louisville and Kentucky.
Yeah. I mean, there's just good games all around. Miami, Syracuse is another good game this week that has playoff implications. That's going to be a good game. Arizona State, Arizona is another one that kind of paints the picture for what the Big 12 championship could look like. So this week matters a ton. Just inside the SEC and out.
Inside the SEC and out, it's a big week. It's the closeout week. Everyone's trying to wrap up their resumes and get them submitted to the committee, and that looks like winning their games. And the question I had for myself was, what do we think are the top rivalries in college football historically? Everybody talks about the big game, taking place at the Horseshoe or taking place at the Big House with Michigan and Ohio State. I'd say that's my number one. But what do you feel like are the biggest rivalries in the SEC or biggest rivalries in college football?
Yeah, I think it comes from the SEC. I think it's Alabama, Auburn, some huge moments that are looked back on from whether you're an Alabama fan, Auburn fan, get looked at as college football memories, like the kick six, or you
Yep.
have, the big play last year from Jalen Monroe to Isaiah Bond to win the game. You have just craziness in any game like that. So I think that's a huge one, but Army Navy, it's not being played this week, right? It gets played in a couple weeks. So it's that one's something special. Yeah.
Yep. It's a huge one. It's a really big one. Army Navy, gotta love it. Takes place in Philly. I think last year they played in Boston, if I'm not mistaken, at Foxborough. But typically it's taking place in West Point or in Philadelphia for that matchup. I think a big rivalry for me. I went to college in Texas, of course. Texas versus Oklahoma, the Red River rivalry or Red River shootout, whatever you remember it as or whatever you go by for that one. That's a big one. We've seen some great play in the past from Baker Mayfield. This season we saw some good play, somewhat, from the Texas team, but that's always a historical one. Played at a neutral site. Georgia, Florida's up there in terms of big rivals when it comes to just those type of games.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah, I mean, you said this year too, like Washington, Oregon, Pac-12 revived another good game that had some recent good memories to it. So, yeah, I mean, rivalry games is where it's at. That's where the memories are made. Every team gets their best game and comes out. So, if you're a fan, you always remember those.
Definitely. And we touched on it earlier, but the Clemson South Carolina game, it always gets my juices up. There's just something about every year. I think a couple of years ago we saw that South Carolina was able to beat Clemson. The same year they were able to beat Tennessee with Hendon Hooker. Even in an okay season for South Carolina, you get those 2 wins with Tennessee and you beat Clemson, the season feels a lot better. And that was with Spencer Rattler, quarterback. But I love that rivalry. It's ideally the top of the ACC with Clemson kind of being that quasi SEC school, top ACC team, and South Carolina find themselves either middle to top or middle to lower, but still always able to compete against a team like Clemson. Big rivalry in the Palmetto State.
Well, it's kind of like Georgia Tech, where it's cross conference but still in state. So you have like the two conferences competing, but you have that common ground with the geography.
Yep. And then we have some other games, of course, that are not rivalries this week, but we're going to talk about lightly in what we call our rivalry week rundown, best of the rest. But we got Arkansas taking on Missouri, Oklahoma's playing LSU, so teams that are geographically close, just they don't have an aligned rival for rivalry week per se. But those are also should be some competitive games as well.
Yeah, it's just a good slate of football.
Good slate of football. And so for our first game, we're going to preview this week. It's only right. Texas taking on Texas A&M, going down to College Station. You need the big rich. Yeah, we're coming to your city. Spreads -6. Texas. The over/unders 48.5. A lot to watch for in this game. A&M looking for their first ever SEC championship appearance, and Texas looking for their first ever SEC championship appearance, looking for their second straight conference championship appearance with Quinn Ewers leading them at quarterback. And the 48.5 number to me feels low. What are your thoughts in terms of that over/under in just this game?
Yeah, well, early on, it's tough to call what's going to happen at the quarterback position. And hearing from Sark that Quinn Ewers is expected to practice this week, hopeful to play in the game. If he doesn't play, that changes things, I think, a little bit for Texas. If you put Arch Manning back there, so maybe the over/unders dependent a little bit on that. Texas A&M does have a great defense, which we can get into more. But it's two teams that I think defensively put up a good fight, and that's where that's coming from. It's also going to be a hard fought game because, like you mentioned, it's for all the marbles. It's who goes to the SEC championship game. It's likely A&M's only shot to the playoffs. Texas with a loss here should still get in, but still you don't want to see that. But with the Quinn Ewers conversation, should he be out in this game? Do you think that impacts the game a little bit in the way you look at it?
I think it absolutely impacts the game in terms of just the pressure and the situation. I know Arch Manning is a capable quarterback. It's a very high pressure game to put yourself in, right? You're not playing Samford. You're not playing someone in the bottom half of the SEC from a standings perspective. This is for all the marbles. I think that it would take, a little bit of time for him to get warmed up and comfortable out there. Not saying he can't win it, but it certainly from a comfort level and being in those high pressure situations, Quinn's done it against Oklahoma State, against teams in the playoffs last year. He's had those high pressure situations to continue to put his team in a place to be in playoff contention both last year and this year.
Yeah, it's a great team around him. I want to see him play. I don't think that they're going to be looking ahead and trying to rest a QB. So if they're going to make the playoffs anyway, I think that they want to come out here, win the SEC. Now, if I'm a Bulldog fan, if I'm a Georgia fan watching this game, would rather see Texas A&M win because it's hard to beat a team twice. If you're
Yep.
looking at this Texas team, but in this game, Texas really one of the best defenses in the country at this point. Questionable opponents that they've played overall, like looking at their strength of schedule. But really, you go out and you play the team that you're against, and aside from Georgia, they're holding it down defensively.
They're definitely holding it down defensively. And you talked a little bit about their schedule. When I think about this game, a lot of my thoughts kind of go into who's the best team Texas has played against, Georgia, and what they were able to do in terms of holding this offense. Can A&M do that? When I look at what A&M has been able to do defensively, they've been pretty impressive throughout the season. But if you look at last week in terms of what they were allowing Peyton Thorne to do, I don't see why Texas couldn't do that as well with the receiving weapons they have with Matthew Golden and Quinn Ewers. But again, on the flip side, as mentioned, it's like they should be able to do that against a tough defense. But the main litmus test I've seen for them defensively was Georgia. So
Yeah.
is A&M's defense going to be able to bounce back to play like a Georgia-like performance from what we've seen this season from them from a pass rushing perspective? Or is Texas able to really flex that offense that we've seen all season? Just maybe not against the same level of competition like a Georgia or an A&M.
Yeah, and really, I think that both teams defensively will be fine. I think it's going to be a defensive game all around. I think that really A&M's defense is probably their best shot at a good offense by controlling the field position. That's how Georgia beat Texas. They were starting around the 40-yard line on average on a drive because they were forcing Texas offense to make mistakes, 3 and outs here and there. A&M looking, I was looking at some numbers and some stats and things, and they're second in the country defensively in opponent completion percentage at 52%, which is pretty outrageous that, only 50% completion rate. And they're really coaxing teams to throw on them because you can't run the ball against this Texas A&M team too well. They have a great run defense. So they're getting teams to pass on them. Their teams aren't doing it well. They're throwing a lot at them. They have a great pass rush. So it's interesting for me to see what A&M will do because you mentioned last week against Auburn. Do they do something like that? Or do they come out and show, a much better defensive performance? That's going to be the key to the game for me is for A&M is how they look defensively as opposed to the offense.
I think so, right? Because we saw, last week, even though the offense came out slow, they were able to pick it up to get back into the game, right? Auburn was able to get a pretty sizable lead early on. They were able to kind of slow Marcel Reed down a little bit, but they were able to figure out offensively. And if it wasn't for a dropped, 2-point conversion, the game could have gone a different way at the end, right? For Texas, when you think about this matchup, if they were to lose, you still think they're going to be in the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken. But if they do win, how do you think the win would look like
for Texas in this game?
Yeah.
I think that they win.
Or like kind of like keys for Texas, we'll say.
Yeah, I think a key for Texas in this game is protecting the quarterback. I'm looking at the one loss that they had in that Georgia game, and the quarterbacks were getting a little bit of pressure on them. Georgia's D-line was doing great at applying that pressure. We know that Texas A&M can do that. They have the guys to do it. They can stop the run. So you're going to have times where Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning, should he have to play, might be in 3rd and long situations where you're going to expect a pass rush. So you can't let a slow start happen. You start losing the field position battle because of 3 and outs. If you keep your quarterback protected, I think that changes the game for Texas and how they win this one.
Absolutely. And that's really the only time, like you mentioned, we've seen Quinn rattled is when he is getting pressured, right? He's not always fully going to be, showing you that he's turnover prone. I think we talked about the last couple of games, he's been playing pretty turnover free football. But if you get pressure on him, put them in those long 3rd down situations, now you're on the road. It's a completely different game. And, when I think about for the Texas A&M offense, because you talked about the defenses are going to be solid, but for Texas A&M's offense, I think, just the usual, establishing the run, getting Amari Daniels involved early on, and, continue to show that Marcel Reed has the ability to throw because we see it. Just take some shots early in this game to kind of keep the defense honest because this Texas defense is pretty smothering if you show them your hand pretty early.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up, and I think where the key is for A&M is in the passing game because last week it was, I don't want to say refreshing, but it was good to see Marcel Reed, redshirt freshman, throwing the ball well and bringing that element to his game, whereas opposed to before when they did have Le'Veon Moss back there. It was a little bit more of a running prioritized offense. So knowing that he can do both, it's how does he adapt to the pressure? How does he come out and perform in a game like this against a good defense? I think Auburn was a good test last week in preparation for this that you mentioned, could have gone either way. So I like this. I think that, to me, looking at the prediction for this game, I think that home field advantage plays the difference in who wins this game.
I definitely understand why you feel that way. When I think about this game, it's such a high pressure situation, right? A&M starts the season off the main spotlight game versus Notre Dame at night, and now they're ending the season the main spotlight game at night playing Texas. I like Texas in this game. I get they're playing on the road, but historically Texas has dominated this series. Texas wants this win pretty bad. Not saying A&M doesn't want it either. And I'm more of a believer in what Quinn Ewers can do in terms of compared to what Marcel Reed can do in this game. And so I like Texas to win this one, 28-21.
Okay. I like A&M. Like I mentioned, I think that the home field is going to be a big piece to it. I think it does sit on the under. I like A&M winning 24-20. I think it's going to be a tough game. I think it's going to be a slow start, but I like Texas A&M here, and maybe all three or both teams plus Georgia and getting into the playoff.
Yeah, that would be quite the day for Greg Sankey and the SEC there. But it should be a fun one out there in College Station. And we always appreciate everybody that watches from the Texas state, the Lone Star State, as they say. Next preview, we got South Carolina, who's currently ranked number 16 in the AP, and taking on Clemson, who's number 12 in the AP. We're recording this on Monday night, and of course, the college football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday. But the spread in this game is Clemson -2.5. The over/under is 49.5.
Yeah, big matchup, the biggest matchup from these two teams since like 2013. I think it was 6-10 matchup then, and they're both sitting in playoff contention. They're right on that fringe. The rankings haven't come out for this week yet. So it'll be interesting to see where Clemson sits, where South Carolina sits. I think that, one of these teams that wins this game could absolutely get in. It's a huge resume booster for South Carolina to win one on the road, for Clemson to then try to get that at-large spot should they not get to play in the ACC championship. So it's a game that is built on momentum. So right now, South Carolina, though, seems to be playing pretty unstoppable ball. I know that you're pretty high on them and the style of ball that they play.
Yeah, they play some pretty bruising football, as I've mentioned before. And, what South Carolina's been able to do, they've been definitely the hottest team in college football over the past month and a half, and some really big wins for them, of course, beating Vanderbilt and some of the other teams. In this game, on the other side, I think the story is, what can Clemson do in their second SEC test this season, right? They're a much more improved team from that week 1 performance we saw against Georgia. And I don't know if Georgia's the same team for better or worse than, from what we saw week 1 against them. But for Clemson, I really think about when it comes to what South Carolina is able to do well, it's their pass rush and getting pressure on, quarterbacks. Cade Klubnik, really the one game that he had a rougher game, still came out with a win, was against Pitt. And Pitt was able to sack him 4 times. I'm curious to think, what kind of pressure South Carolina can get on him, and how much of an impact will that have on the ACC quarterback right now?
Yeah. I mean, they're scoring points. Like they're point heavy team, if you take that Georgia game out of the conversation. But that's been coming against a pass rush that I don't think compares to South Carolina. I mean, you just look at their 2 best players in Kyle Kennard and Dillard Stewart. There's 18 sacks just between those 2 guys this season. So it's a lot for them to deal with, for Cade Klubnik to deal with. So, should he be having a rough day, they're going to have to maybe, use the ground, and that's tough against South Carolina too. Phil Maffa, a lot of seniority there, and they could go that route. I think that South Carolina's defense right now is just very, very tough to play against. And the only opportunity that teams really had in beating South Carolina was trying to get a couple turnovers. That, LSU, Alabama, it was the turnovers that, as of late, have not been an issue.
Yeah, early in the season we talked about it with the interceptions and the fumbles from the quarterback play, and also from other players on the team. That's not an issue now. Lenore Sellers is protecting the football. He's not giving it to the other team, and he's putting it in the pay dirt. He's getting touchdowns, right? Hit, a couple weeks ago, he had a 5-touchdown game. And so for South Carolina's defense, being able to stop that tough rushing attack, South Carolina's going to run down your throat. They're going to control the time of possession. We've seen it. And, it reminds me a little bit of the LSU game when we were talking about it, because I feel like I'm holding Cade Klubnik to this Garrett Nussmeier regard right now, right? 29 touchdowns in the year. He's sitting at second in the ACC in touchdowns. I get that he hasn't played a defense like South Carolina. I'm not saying he hasn't played an SEC defense. He's not played a defense like South Carolina. But he's obviously proven that he's a good passer. Phil Maffa sitting at top 5 in the ACC rushing wise. And so we'll see what this test brings in terms of that offense for Clemson, who's trying to, get into the SEC Big Ten Invitational, according to Davo, against this South Carolina defense and this offense from South Carolina as well.
Yeah, because the offense from South Carolina is good enough in its own regard. Like the defense is really the Hollywood all-star piece of South Carolina, but the offense is great as well. And right now, Clemson's run defense up, down. We saw them last week at Citadel. Citadel ran all over them. Stanford did the same thing. So you can run on Clemson. And, between the running back at South Carolina and Raheem Rocket Sanders or Lenore Sellers, like they're hard to bring down. Right now, Sellers has the 3rd most scrambles in college football. And it's usually coming as a result of him breaking a tackle. You get to the quarterback, turns into a 20-yard run. It's frustrating. It's frustrating because you think you have him and he gets out of it. Right now, like I love the brand of football South Carolina's playing. Right now, Lenore Sellers 5th highest QBR in road games in college football. So he's slowly making his way up the ranks of highly revered college quarterbacks. And to the casual fan, I think maybe it's flying under the radar, but what he's doing is what's put South Carolina in this position to where they maybe could make the playoffs.
It's definitely put them in a position where they can make the playoffs. Their resume is getting stronger and stronger with some wins over Missouri and other teams here. And, as a former new SEC podcast dog of the week, he's an absolute animal. What he's been able to do in terms of, like you mentioned, his QBR of the past couple of games makes it seem like he's going to continue to perform to that level. And so if both these quarterbacks perform at a high level, I think you're absolutely right. The main story is, what can the South Carolina defense do against this Clemson offense? Because I think we know what the South Carolina offense will be able to do. The defense, in terms of Thanksgiving, is the turkey and the ham. The offense is the sides. And right now it's mac and cheese. And so I don't see them missing in this one. I like South Carolina personally. What's your final prediction in this one?
I like South Carolina too. I think if Clemson fails to pass protect properly, South Carolina will be all over them. Unless they can get some turnovers off South Carolina, I think it's a game for them. Fun fact for those betting out there, South Carolina's 4-0 against the spread in road games this year. Even if I didn't know that stat, I like them regardless. I like South Carolina 27-24 on the road and starting to feel a little bit more likely to punch in their ticket. Yeah. Should some things happen.
Should some things happen, right? I like South Carolina 28-20. So close prediction to yours. I think that they take care of business here. I think that they kind of keep this offense at bay. I think, at the end, Clemson's able to get another touchdown and kind of get it close. Maybe they attempted onside, but it is recovered by South Carolina, and they find a way to win this one. Taking place in Athens, Georgia, Sanford Stadium, Georgia Tech, them Yellow Jackets, taking on Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia's number 6 currently in the AP, but from a spread perspective, Georgia is favored by 19.5, and the over-under is 53.5. Carson Beck coming off of a 4-touchdown performance, looking to continue that against some Power 4 competition this week.
Yeah, 6 wins in this series in a row for Georgia. But Georgia Tech right now is one of those teams that's playing a little bit of spoiler. Like coming out in the year when they beat Florida State, we thought that meant something. We saw what Florida State was, but then what they did against Miami. I think that they're kind of built for this game. Like this Georgia Tech team has already won a high marquee matchup. And while Georgia has punched its ticket to the SEC championship game, should they lose this one and lose in that game, the conversation could be a little bit different around their playoff chances. So Georgia Tech has a lot to play for in this one. And that could play a role in it. I mean, the mentality of that.
Definitely could play a role in it. And the Georgia Tech team is rolling year over year, right? This is their second year getting at least 6 wins. They're 7-4 right now, 5th in the ACC. Like you mentioned, big win over Miami. So you've already beaten what looks to be one playoff team. You have an opportunity to beat another one here on the road. And for, fans that are listening to this, whether they're college football casuals or, locked in Georgia or Georgia Tech fans, they know that game last year that took place in Atlanta was very close, 31-23. It came down to the wire, and so this Tech team, it seems like it doesn't matter who they put at quarterback. Whether it's Philo or Aaron Philo or if it's going to be Haynes King, they're still finding ways to win games.
Yeah, and it's the tough, task at hand of trying to stop both. They did such a good job against Miami of in third down, switching up personnel, bringing in Haynes King or switching it out. And that confusion, I think, was a huge piece to how they were able to keep that rolling. So I think they'll play the 2 QB system in this one. Philo taking more of the passing snaps and Haynes King doing a little bit more of the running, throw a little here and there. But it really throws off a defense. And this is a Georgia team right now. They're winning games, but it feels incomplete where if the defense is playing really good, the offense is not. If the offense is playing really good, the defense is not. Just like last week against UMass. They're not fully complete. So could this be a situation where it's a shootout or
which is scary, because if it is complete, and we're in the last game of the season, so we're using this if we see a complete game. I think we kind of saw one a little bit against Tennessee. If we see a full complete game, this could get ugly. But if we see what we saw, like you mentioned with UMass, Georgia Tech is going to be able to score. They're going to be able to build some confidence, and Georgia could still win, but it could be a little bit closer than maybe how they want the game to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about Georgia Tech's defense, because we know, aside from Carson Beck last week, he played really, really well against, an inferior team, obviously, but his roller coaster has been evident this year, the up and downs of it. Miami, number 1 points per game in the country. Georgia Tech held them 20 less when they played. They knew how to shut down a team that was playing proficient offense.
Yep.
I think that they have things dialed up for this game. So it is up to Georgia to come out with their best foot forward. I think if Georgia puts their best foot forward, they win both sides of the ball.
Yep.
It's do they do that? They look super porous last week on defense. There's been some turnover struggles that seem to be getting a little bit better, but they've let teams hang around, except for maybe Texas and Auburn. They tend to turn it up kind of late in games.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right? Because that defense, like you mentioned, did a good job of kind of holding Cam Ward to a much more contained game than usual. And typically, what Carson Beck's challenge has been interceptions, right? Over the past couple games, he's had 6 touchdowns and 500 yards. I think he's only had 1 interception. But if he throws an interception in this game, this would be his 5th game out of 7 games having 1 interception this year. On the other side for Tech, they've only collected 5 interceptions this season, puts them bottom 2 in the ACC. So if that is not a challenge for Carson Beck, this defense can definitely hold teams to lower point totals. You talked about it with the Miami game, but if they can't force turnovers, that has kind of been typically Georgia's kryptonite in some of these games.
Yeah. Yeah. And, looking at kind of some keys for that game, I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, for me though, in this game, I think that the key for both teams is the same. And I think it comes from the linebacker position. Right now on Georgia's side, from the linebacker style, you're going to have 2 quarterback system running. It's a lot on the IQs of those guys who are going to be ball hawking and watching what's going on. Why I think Georgia's going to win this game is because of the level of play that they have at that position. They have that higher IQ. They're built for games like this. Now on the other side, Georgia Tech, in the same vein, we've seen Carson Beck struggle with underneath coverage. Which is where you're going to have those guys there. You do have some injuries, ETN day-to-day, Bell day-to-day. They're both expected to play, but Nate Frazier's the key back. I think he'll get 20-plus carries. Yeah. Should ETN not be able to play. So it is up to your linebackers to shut that down. So to me, those are the keys to the game, but I like Georgia's skill level and just the talent level being higher as the reason for me.
Yeah, and I think the skill and talent level, at least stars wise, looks pretty spread out. But I think it's a little bit closer than in terms of on the field. We'll call it like on the field strength versus weight room strength. But ultimately, I agree. I like Georgia in this one, and they're playing for all the marbles. Obviously, made the SEC championship. I'm in agreement with you. They need to win this one to continue to kind of hold that spot, and not make the SEC championship game a must win for them in order to make the playoffs.
Yeah. So, final scores, Georgia right now, 19.5, 20-point favorites. This year so far, Georgia's 2-8 against the spread in games that they're favored. Not that it means a whole lot, but it's, like I said, a team that lets teams hang around. So I like Georgia winning, not by 20. I think 28-17 in Georgia's favor.
I think we were pretty close in that one. I think I said 30-15 for that one.
Okay. Yeah. It'll be, I think, a closer game. Georgia turns it on maybe a little bit later, scores again to cover or something like that. But I could see Georgia Tech having the ability to drive down a few times.
Yep.
We have Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl. Two teams right now that want nothing more than to beat the other team. The season might not be fully successful for either, but it's the one thing that you can kind of hang your hat on is that you beat the team across the state. Auburn thinks that they can beat Alabama. Alabama thinks that they can beat Auburn. Right now, Alabama 11.5-point favorites. The over under 52.5. I think right now, to me, game being played in Tuscaloosa is the key difference here. We've seen what Alabama's looked like on the road, so they're lucky to be playing at home in this one. How do you feel after looking at a tough Alabama performance last week and how they might perform here?
Yeah, I for this game, just looking at that performance from last week, part of me would say, "Oh, okay, this is very telling of who Alabama is." And I think that's what everybody wants people to say in the media. They want you to say that Alabama's down, but I don't think people really realize and understand how much players get up for these rivalry games. This one means a lot. I'm sure Saban's going to be around in some capacity. It's just there's a lot of pride in this game. And like
Yeah.
you mentioned, no matter how good or bad your season is, beating Auburn or beating Alabama is the number one, probably goal, or one of the main goals for the season. So I feel that Alabama is, probably having a hard week of practice, is getting their head right for this type of game. And they're probably watching the tape and looking at, what Auburn was able to do effectively against A&M to hopefully try to stop that for their side.
Yeah, and it's kind of how do you see it as a anomaly in Auburn's performance? What they were able to do last week, we've seen just an emergence of Cam Coleman in that game. Is it something they're going to be able to keep doing, or was it a lapse on A&M's part? He found stride. Peyton Thorne did last week. Alabama's DBs have they started out the season looking like the shakiest unit. They've been better as of late. Malachi Moore, Bray Hubbard, Damani Jackson. They've looked super capable of shutting down something like this. But I think it's all about the mentality. It can in a game like this, do you ride the rivalry wave and bring back the mentality, or do you let yourself get down after a tough week? I think that they bounce back. This Auburn team is built defensively for one that could give Alabama trouble too.
Yeah, and you had talked about it in the preview going into the A&M Auburn game and what this Auburn defense has been able to do to stop the rushing attack. We've seen it in some of the games this season. They were able to kind of contain Marcel Reed from a rushing perspective. Passing was where he was kind of able to bust it open for them despite the loss for A&M. And for Auburn, I think that I don't think that these last 2 weeks were an anomaly. One being UL Monroe, and obviously last week being against A&M. What we're seeing is they just have burners on the outside. Like, quite frankly, Cam Coleman, he's a burner. KLS, we talk about it. And I mean, that almost catch at the end, or where he had like 2 feet in, but it wasn't fully caught. Like, he's got some guys out there. The challenge has been Peyton Thorne just putting the ball on the dot. In a win, you saw a couple overthrows, but you saw a lot more positives in terms of hitting guys in the hands. Really letting the run with Jarquez Hunter kind of establish the pass. So I think there's something there. And I think to me, it's like, how can I not believe in them given the officialness, we'll say, of the competition of A&M compared to ULM?
Yeah. And that's a big point to it. And they can run the ball well too. And Alabama missing some pieces. Deontay Lawson now out for the season. So it is worrisome from the Alabama side of knowing that this team is clicking right now. A couple weeks ago or a month ago, this game might have looked a lot different, and the spread probably would have been 20 plus, but now Alabama on a slide, Auburn on an incline.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked at Auburn's defense and what they could give Alabama trouble in, they're 11th in the nation right now in opponent yards per carry. And, Alabama has kind of slipped up a little bit in what their rushing attack looks like. And I think last week against Oklahoma, had they gone with the running back route as opposed to the quarterback route, that north-south vertical downfield pound the rock running, it would have been better. Instead, they went for the quarterback, a little bit more finesse style.
Yep.
I don't know if either will work in this game, but I'd like to see Alabama get back to running with the running backs in this one and hopefully opening something up.
Yeah, because I think you had mentioned that they had less than 15 rushing attempts between Jam Miller and Justice Haynes combined, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And it felt like just a shift in game plan. And I don't know if it was, bad reads or the game plan just called for it. I think DeBar mentioned, Justice Haynes had some some injuries or some stuff going on. So that could lead a little bit into why that happened. But you got some dogs back there. Give them some carries.
Right.
Because you're going to have to throw the ball in this game. You're
Yeah.
going to have to do it. A&M did it last week with Marcel Reed, redshirt freshman quarterback. He's super capable. I think that Milroe is. He's getting a lot of hate as of late, but he has an arm. He has an
Yeah.
arm. He can hit his guys. Should he set his feet when he's playing great? It's great. When it's bad, it's bad. But Alabama's going to have to throw in this game, and there's no better way to open that up than to give the ball to your running backs. A little bit of play action. Auburn is going to be playing the run.
Right. So you just kind of want to see, you think, a key for this game is it's not just, obviously you talked about what Auburn's able to do in terms of opponents rushing yards per game, 11th in the nation. You're looking for Alabama to diversify how they're running, right? Use your running backs, you still use the RPO, kind of get more guys involved, of course, in the passing. Some of the interceptions last week for them, were just bad reads. Like obviously the Ryan Williams one, it was pretty clear as day that he was covered by the corner there. And of course, the sack, fumble, interception one was also a tough one. But on the Auburn side, what do you think about this offense against the Alabama defense?
Yeah,
Because they haven't really seen in terms of receivers that type of duo, I would say, this season.
Yeah. I mean, Alabama's consistently left guys on an island. You have some guys out there that can make plays. Alabama does too. It's a gamble. It's a risk. Do you trust Peyton Thorne to make those plays? So I think that we're going to see Auburn take those shots. I mean, it's a game. What do you have to lose at this point in the year? So I think Auburn takes some shots and it diversifies a little bit. You're going to run the ball. You're going to pass the ball. It's gambling when you're playing that game. So I think that Auburn can do it. I think that they're going to score some points. Right now, I think that if Alabama can bring back that dog mentality, bounce back from the game last week, and bring a little bit of confidence to this game, then they're going to out-skill this Auburn team.
Yep, absolutely. And I think on the other side, like I feel like I hope I'm not coming off like pro Auburn, but just the swagger that they're going to probably be coming into this game with that top 15 win last week, just the emotion that comes from winning in 4 overtimes, winning for your boy Hugh Freeze, not your boy specifically, but their head coach Jarquez Hunter, continued to have pretty good performances this season. I think that Auburn could really show something in this game. But then part of me thinks about, how Bama beat Missouri and what they were able to do with those 2 receivers kind of locking up Theo Weiss and Luther Burden. If they could repeat that type of performance, I mean, I personally think Brady Cook is better than Peyton Thorne, right? And I think that the receivers that Missouri has are one of the 2 are probably, better in some ways than KLS and Cam Coleman. So that'll be a hot take there. But if Alabama can have a defensive performance like that in terms of 2 top receivers, that could bode well in terms of this game against Auburn.
Yeah, and I think they could shut them down. I mean, to me, the key for Auburn in this game is the defense. Oklahoma, you got out of there with 24 points. You didn't have to do a lot offensively. 1 touchdown came on a short field, 1 came on a pick 6. And this one, if you're Auburn, as much as I hate to say it, Milroe's going to run the ball, and he's going to do it often. If you shut that down, I mean, working or not, he's going to run the ball. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing for Alabama. It's just the identity of the team. If you shut that down, then you're a team that is built to beat Alabama. I mean, USF shut down Milroe's run, and they almost beat him. Oklahoma did that. That's the key to beating this team. So if you're Auburn, you just need to commit to that.
Yep. I 100% agree with you. And I'm going to pose a question here and just want to get your thoughts. Do we see another quarterback from Alabama in this game if the game goes a little sideways?
If the game goes sideways, maybe.
Okay.
Given
the state of where the program looks like and maybe what you've been reading.
I don't think so. I mean, it's at this point, if the game is so sideways that it's looking like, it's a last ditch effort, then maybe, because at this point you're playing for, you're not going to make the playoffs. You're playing for a bowl game. You're going to be a 4-loss team. If that is the case, then maybe you give some guys some snaps who's going to be playing next year. To me, while he's not Nick Saban, DeBoer's not Nick Saban. This team is not, the coaching staff is not the same. They know what they're doing. They're putting the best quarterback out there. If Ty Simpson was a better option, if Austin Mack was a better option, they've been seeing these guys in practice for months. They would be out there playing. So to me, no, I think that they stick with him. Last week was pretty brutal, and they stuck with him. And it's because he gives his team the best chance to win.
Definitely. And there was obviously still some life there. Of course, that touchdown that was called back by what some thought was a questionable call from the location of where the ref was at. Certainly changed the momentum that was looking to be built there, but they stuck with Milroe. That was kind of the story of the game last week and the story for the season for Alabama. You live and die by what Milroe does, and at least that's how fans feel about it. And for Auburn, you're coming into this game. This is big for them, looking to win the Iron Bowl, but coming off of a big win. Offense is hitting on all cylinders the past couple weeks. And so final predictions here. Alabama's favored by 11.5. I personally think Alabama bounces back. I don't think it's going to be an 11.5 point spread per se. I'm going to say 31-21.
Okay. I like Alabama 38-20. Could be a big homer Alabama take. I don't think that they dropped 2 in a row. They looked great at home. And I think that's the key in this game is the home field advantage as to why that they would cover.
I mean, it's tough to play down there for sure. So, and, it is Nick Saban field. It's going to be a lot on the line. I know DeBoer knows he needs it. So, winning with style points in this game would be big for them. And of course, winning for Auburn, if it plays out that way, would be big for them as well.
Yeah.
Last full game preview we're doing here. We got Tennessee, who's currently 7 in the AP, taking on Vanderbilt. Spread for Tennessee's 10.5. Over/under is 48.5. This game feels more interesting than ever, given the season that Vanderbilt has. Started off red hot, knocking off some pretty tough teams in the conference. Played Texas really close as well. Kind of cooled off the past couple weeks, right? Dropped to South Carolina, dropped the game to LSU. Tennessee, you played UTEP, and now you're finding yourself in a spot where you're most likely, controlling your destiny to get one of the 12 spots. And so this is a big one. This is a big landmine to not get tripped on. What do we think here at the new SEC podcast?
Yeah, I think Vanderbilt plays with a little bit of swagger. They play with I don't want to overuse the word spoiler today, but they play with that mentality of wanting to mess up a team's season and being that, underrated team, the underdog mentality of wanting to do it. And this is Tennessee's last stop before locking in a playoff bid. At this point, should they win this one, it's 93% per ESPN for them to make it with a win in this game. I think it's more of a lock just because of the way the rest of the field's shaped up. But right now, I mean, it's two teams that would prefer to keep the ball on the ground all game. The issue in this one is that Tennessee has probably one of the, not maybe one of the best, but they do have one of the premier run defenses in college football. And that's going to be the biggest threat to Vanderbilt. Yeah,
probably one of the best run defenses they faced this season. And we kind of saw what, the South Carolina rushing defense was able to do, slowing down Vanderbilt in that game and being able to kind of contain Diego Pavia and that magic that he's been able to offer this season. And then for Tennessee, Dylan Sampson poses a really tough challenge against this Vanderbilt defense. Their defense has not been their strong suit for the most part this season. And Dylan Sampson would love to continue this campaign right now, where I think he's really just rushing right now. He's sitting at top 5 in the SEC when it comes to yards per game and yards overall.
Yeah. That's the key is who's going to be able to run more effectively. I think Dylan Sampson is the guy to do that, because when you're looking at what Vanderbilt will have to do to be able to run the ball effectively, it's likely going to be coming from Diego Pavia, like as their feature back almost, because he's the guy that makes the reads. They have a lot of those interesting, tricky plays, get him out of the pocket. So I wanted to look at what Tennessee did against other quarterbacks that are in a similar suit. And Jalen Milroe, when they played him, one of his worst rushing performances of the season, aside from the most recent Oklahoma game. Speaking of Oklahoma, they had Hawkins in that game held to 1.8 per carry. They got Jackson Arnold benched in that game with 2 fumbles. They lost to Arkansas, but not because of Taylor Green or Malachi Singleton. They held them to pretty weak rushing numbers. So Tennessee knows what to do to stop a quarterback from running the ball.
Right. This is not unfamiliar territory for them. And so the assignment looks pretty clear. You just hope you don't get test anxiety, right? You're able to perform in front of the lights there in Nashville. Any other closing thoughts or final keys for this game when you think about this one?
Yeah. Defensively, Vanderbilt right now, it's tough to see the route for them to put some pressure on to Tennessee. And this one, they let Nussmeier rack up a pretty hefty day last week. So I think that Tennessee takes care of business. If you're Vanderbilt, you need to force some turnovers. They're going to run the ball, but with Iamaleava throwing the ball, you have the opportunity to get some 3 and outs. when he's playing great, it's good football, but you might have an opportunity for a takeaway or two. You play the field position game well, you play the clock management game well.
Yep.
I just think that Tennessee's going to pound the rock too well, so I do like them in this game.
Yeah, I ultimately, I think having the home field advantage could play to their advantage in this game, especially in the first half. Personally, Dylan Sampson's a whole different beast than what they faced, and we saw what Raheem Sanders was able to do against this defense, and I could see Dylan Sampson having a similar type game for them as well. Tennessee for me, this is a clear win, so I like them 35-10.
Ooh, okay, I'm gonna say 24-10. We both have them covering. It's at this point in the season when teams are starting to like eye on the prize.
Yeah.
That's when it gets a little harder to bet against them. It doesn't have to go that way. Vanderbilt would love nothing more than to win at home, but yeah, I like Tennessee. We both do. So
we both do. So Vol Nation could be happy if they win this one and find themselves waiting on the committee to say that they are in the top 12. And so we wanted to make sure we covered some of the other great rivalry games. So we're going to do our rivalry week rundown, best of the rest. There's a ton of great SEC games, some that are rivals, some that are, I think, in some ways feel like rivals. And so let's just get straight to it. Arkansas taking on Missouri, going to Mizzou. Missouri's favorite 3.5, over under 54.5. Keys to the game, thoughts?
I think this is another one of those shootouts that Missouri finds themselves in that goes right down to the wire. Last point wins, kind of like South Carolina. Kind of like they had against Vanderbilt. I like Arkansas on this one. It's one of those things that maybe where I just have been taking Arkansas over and over until they finally, prove me right. So I'm gonna take Arkansas on this one, 30-24. I think that they're due, and yeah.
Hey, I like Missouri in this game. Brady Cook got heart. He's the heart and soul of this team. Everything runs through him. Let Brady cook. I think Luther Burton's trying to get one more game with some good stats to help his NFL resume. I doubt he plays in the bowl game. If I had to guess, maybe he gets a Senior Bowl invite. But I like Missouri in this one. I think they cover 24-20.
Yeah, Mississippi State, Ole Miss playing in the Egg Bowl. This is a Friday night game. This is one that maybe doesn't have the highest stakes. Ole Miss on the outside sitting in. This isn't a huge resume booster for them. They're almost 27-point favorites in this one. Is there a shot for Mississippi State to win this, or do you got Ole Miss outright?
If I win the lottery, then Mississippi State can win this game. There is no shot they win this game. I like Ole Miss. They're sitting at 15 in the AP, 26.5-point spread. I think it's favorable. The difference between, Mississippi State and the games they've played recently in terms of their offense getting about, 15-20 or more in a game is this Ole Miss defense is very tough. Even though they lost to Florida, they only gave up 24 points. I like Ole Miss big in this one. I'm going to say 45-17.
All right. I like 42-13. We're kind of in the same vein. I think it's big, passing too much from Ole Miss for this one.
Yep. Florida taking on Florida State. Florida State coming off their second win of the season. Charleston Southern, CSU. Florida's favorite 15, and the over-under is 45.5.
Florida State's a bad football team. They're just bad.
Really?
I got to put it out there as it is. I mean, they're 3-8 against the spread this year. Florida right now surging. DJ Lagway has not lost a game that he's played the full game in yet this year. I got to ride with Florida. I think they're a better team even than the record would show had they had this type of team built up the entire year. 14.5-point favorites. I think that they win 40-13.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Ball has been running all over teams the last couple of weeks. We talk about DJ. I'm a big fan, of course, like what he's been able to do this season. Texas boy, true freshman, cooking out there. Go DJ. That's my DJ. All of that. I like Florida in this one. I'm going to say 42-17 once again. Oklahoma at LSU. LSU's favored by 6. Over-under is 47.5. This feels like good old classic football. LSU coming off a win against Vanderbilt. Oklahoma coming off a win against the Alabama Crimson Tide. What do we think?
I think that if Oklahoma brings the same quarterback run game plan that they brought to Alabama last week, we saw Alabama do it against LSU and it worked, even though they game planned for it. I like Oklahoma in this one for that reason. Even though they're on the road, I think that they're coming off of a pretty high momentum game that's built in some confidence in a younger core of a team. So Oklahoma 27, LSU 24.
Okay. I like LSU in this one. Get the gat. I'm taking Kyron Lacey in the squad. I think Brian Kelly, he needs this one. I feel like I find myself saying Brian Kelly needs this one quite often this season, but when he needs it, at least coming off of a loss, They've had a couple rebound games, and so this is the one. Unfortunately for Danny Stutzman, he might not be able to get his last win of the season for Oklahoma, but for LSU and the Nuss Bus and Kyron Lacey and the Get the Gat squad, I like them in this one, 28-21.
All right. In Kentucky, we got Louisville playing at Kentucky. This is one close spread, Louisville -4. Louisville's played some good ball in the ACC so far. Do they beat Kentucky? Kind of lower tier in the SEC right now.
Yeah. And Kentucky's rolling with their freshman quarterback, if I'm not mistaken, in this game. Of course, I think Barry Brown is going to be play an effective role. It's kind of been, one of their main weapons there with Dane Key as well. On the Louisville side, this is a pretty competitive team. They were in the rankings at some point, but of course, they're not ranked right now, at least in the AP. What's your final thoughts on this one?
I think Kentucky wins by 1. I think a close game right down to the wire. I mean, it's a tough score to predict. I think 2019 Kentucky, give me the SEC.
Okay. All right. You go on SEC. I think I'm going to go ACC in this one. It is taking place in Kroger Field. I'm going with those Cardinals. I'm going to take them 24-17.
All right. That's it for the SEC games. I mean, we got a lot to watch. A lot of screens are going to be going on for me this weekend. I don't even know. I got to spreadsheet it, figure out who I'm going to watch.
Right. We need 2-3 TVs.
Yeah.
And around the country, it's rivalry edition. There's some Big 12 chaos. There's so many different scenarios in terms of which teams can get in for them. When we look at the ACC, games to watch, Miami, Syracuse all day. Miami's favored by 10.5. The over under 67.5.
Yeah. This would put Clemson into the ACC championship game if Syracuse can win. Yep. I think Syracuse is a good team here. You got Miami playing on the road. Miami hasn't looked like that dominant consistently throughout the season. They've looked super, super dominant offensively, but defensively, teams can run it up, and Syracuse might be the one to do that. That's going to be a good game.
Yeah, Kyle Hahn-McCord right now, he's sitting at top 5 in the ACC in terms of touchdowns and yards. And so, Fran over there, the head coach, talked about, Ohio State gifting them that Kyle Hahn-McCord at quarterback. And so that'll be an interesting one to watch. I could definitely see Syracuse pulling off the upset in the Carrier Dome. Yeah. What I love about Rivalry Week is that there's so many in-state games. These games might not seem like they're impactful when it comes to the playoffs, but NC State, North Carolina from the ACC, we got Virginia versus Virginia Tech, Cavaliers versus Hokies, and Cal's taking on SMU. So, the new ACC with that matchup for SMU. They've clinched their spot in terms of the ACC championship, but if they were to somehow lose to Cal, who's coming off an emotional win over Stanford, that changes things in terms of the SEC or other conferences that can get teams in.
Yeah, because like we said it many times, the committee has been non-committal in what will happen with a conference championship loss. It sounds like you're going to be in, but if you're an SMU team who drops this game to Cal, you drop the game to Miami in the conference championship, you're on a slide. Do you go in as a sliding team?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. I think the SMU takes care of business here, but it is a game that could go either way.
Definitely go either way. It's going to be at home. And so, another week of probably Nick Saban talking about how good Kevin Jennings is on College Game Day once again. Yeah. In the Big Ten, we have the big game. I think the Ohio State-Michigan spread is over 20 points. But it's still Michigan, and Ohio State, of course, led by Will Howard, stomping out the SIG, looking to wrap up the big game and get this game for Ohio State, which is probably the first time in quite a few years that they've been able to win the big game.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ohio State will take care of business here. To me, I think Ohio State's probably the scariest team in college football, given the only team that they're behind and that beat them is Oregon, and knowing how hard it is to beat a team twice. I think Ohio State right now is a tough team to beat. Michigan will not be the one to do it for me.
Yeah, I definitely like Ohio State in this one. Pretty big across the Big Ten in terms of teams contending for playoff spots. We got Maryland taking on Penn State. Penn State's played some close football, but like you said, ultimately it's about winning games, and Penn State's been able to do that. They've only lost one, so they should take care of business. Oregon's taking on Washington, a little Pac-12 throwback or Pac-10 throwback for our older guest. That should be an interesting one. And then we got the Paul Bunyan game. Minnesota taking on Wisconsin. So not for playoff, not involving a playoff team, but it's quite an impressive trophy in the college football landscape.
Yeah. Don't count out Purdue, Indiana. Don't count out Purdue
True.
beating Indiana.
Can't,
They're
can't
30-point favorites, but anything could happen. So
anything can happen. Fun fact: there's a school called IUPUI, so it's Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis branch. But in this game, these are two schools playing each other. Purdue separate, coming out of West Lafayette, and then of course Indiana from Bloomington.
yeah.
Should be an interesting one. Purdue was able to give Illinois a close game this season, but Indiana, I'm sure, is looking to win with style points, and Signetti has shown that he's willing to score and run it up as needed.
Yeah. Got to build that resume.
Got to build the old resi. And lastly, the Big Ten, USC's taking on Notre Dame. It's more of an independent game since Notre Dame is the higher ranked team. This is a historic game. I think about the one game where I think they had Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush, and they were trying to hurdle over. And I want to say that USC won that one, but it's a good game of colors. Usually Notre Dame pulls out their greens. I don't know what jersey they're wearing this week, but it's always a fun rivalry. So I like they're playing the last week of the season.
Yeah, this is their last game before the playoffs. They're pretty much a lock. If they lose this one, it would be interesting to see what they do with a Notre Dame team after losing to NIU, and if they lose here to USC.
I don't think they'd be out. I think that they would be teetering between 10 and 12 though.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because then I think you take teams that maybe lost a conference championship game, and they would definitely be over a Notre Dame team who sat home. But it would be tough to slide in like a 3-loss South Carolina or something ahead of a Notre Dame team.
Yep. Yeah. So. Well, definitely interesting one there for them. In the Big 12, there's too many scenarios to calculate, but I think everyone has formulated that the Big 12 will most likely get one playoff spot. But in terms of the scenarios, we got Oklahoma State taking on Colorado. Colorado at this point needs absolute chaos to get in the conference championship game. It's not looking likely. That's no shade to them. It's just that they need pretty much Houston to beat BYU. They need Kansas State to beat Iowa State. I think they need Arizona to beat Arizona State. So all the top 3 teams would have to fall for them to find themselves in that conference championship game. Any games stand out to you from the Big 12, or just any thoughts on some of the scenarios?
I mean, don't count them out. I mean, I think Kansas State for sure could win. I think Arizona could win. So this could be one where the 2 teams that are sitting at the top of the Big 12 both lose. So I could see that happening and really shaking it up. Houston too.
Houston too, right? Houston alum right here. I always talk about it, and Cougars on Cougars. So they're going out to Provo, Utah, to take on BYU, and BYU's right now on a little losing skid with Kansas and of course with Arizona State. So kind of playing for some style points and probably hoping for chaos. But it looks like BYU's chances, unless they find themselves in that conference championship game, the door might be closed for the playoffs unless they get to the conference championship game.
Yeah. And I want to shift it a little bit to a game that I think is a sneaky important game, and that's Memphis Tulane.
Okay. All right. Well, G5 love.
Because really, other than Boise State, a lot of preseason brackets predictions had either Boise State or Memphis in there as the team that was going to make it for the G5 spot. I know one of us had one and one had the other. I didn't want to.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I had
Virginia Tech in there, so I don't want to talk about it. But this is one where, like, at this point, there's bracket predictions and scenarios and simulations that put Tulane in over a Big 12 champion. Yeah, that's assuming that they win this game and beat Army in the American Championship. But a loss here, even though they're playing in the conference championship game, I think that pretty much eliminates the American Conference from playoff contention should Tulane lose this.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I'm not super privy to the strength of schedule for Tulane, but to me, losing 2 of your out of conference Power 4 teams with Kansas State and Oklahoma, I find it interesting that some scenarios find them getting in over a Big 12 team or having a higher seed. But I guess from an eye test perspective, they have been running pretty well against their AAC schedule, and Tulane historically has been a good program, formerly coached by Willie Fritz, of course, Houston head coach now. And they've proven they can beat teams like Caleb Williams in the past and the Cotton Bowl. But for this game right now, Memphis is always pretty competitive as well, right? They were, like you mentioned, they had found themselves in the competition for the AAC. They'd love to do nothing more than just get a good win to finish the season out. And so that is interesting. I'm in agreement with you. If Memphis is to win this game, I think that would eliminate the AAC, just given what we saw from Army last week in that Notre Dame game.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one from the G5 standpoint, I think is just it's a big game.
And then Oregon, Boise State. I mean, the spread's 20.5, but Oregon State beat Washington State last week, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's interesting to me. Obviously, both those teams are okay. Washington State was ranked at one point. And for Boise, trying to finish up that Heisman campaign, we had a little discussion about that one. What do you think about this game taking place on Friday night?
Yeah, I think it's another opportunity for Boise State to impress again. It's Oregon State. It is what it is, but it's another opportunity for you to continuously solidify yourself as not even a, needing a conference championship to get in. You will need it, but an at-large spot, like you are one of the top 12 teams in the country.
Right.
They're playing for a bye now.
Yeah.
So this is a big game for them just to continue to improve the resume and the eye test.
So when you say that, are you saying if they lose the next one of the next two games, can they get in the playoffs?
Yeah. Not one of the next two. If they lose this game and they win the Mountain West, I think that, they still get in as a G5 team.
Yeah, I would agree.
Depending on what happens with Tulane, because now if Tulane wins out, I would put Tulane in over Boise State, who loses this game and then wins the Mountain West. I think that
interesting. Yeah,
Tulane maybe gets that nod
right
to me.
And they played Oklahoma close. They played Kansas State decently close as well. So we're going to play this close Power 4 game, and then both teams that hypothetically had 2 losses.
Yeah,
maybe Tulane gets a nod. The boys out of New Orleans.
So. Yeah, and that would include a win over a likely to be ranked Army team tomorrow night.
Yep. It'll be interesting to see where they put them, right? They put them at 23 and Tulane beats them. They could fall out if they put them at 23 and Navy beats them. That changes things as well. Navy, playing against Army the week after the conference championship week. So a lot to look at. And that was a fun one you picked. I like the Tulane Memphis pick. I always love some G5 love here. A lot of good games, a lot of rivals going on across the nation. And so that wraps up our week 14 rivalry week episode. So much fun. The season's been amazing. If you've been rocking with us, we really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts when we look at this week in terms of SEC or just college football playoff, just all the stuff swirling around? Any closing thoughts?
I think it's going to be another week like last week with upsets. I think some teams that are highly favored are going to lose games this week. I want to hear what other people's predictions are. So if you're watching the full episode and you made it this far, let us know what you think some games are going to happen. And we're going to break them down afterwards and see where every team's going to end up.
Yeah, we'll break them down. We'll give you a recap as we always do. And, thank you for tuning in. We want to hear what you think. It's been a fun season. So please follow, subscribe, comment below. Comment and tell us what you like, what you don't like, what teams you like. Last week we did a poll in terms of which team was most likely to pull off the upset, and 3 of the 4 teams pulled out an upset, right? Auburn, Florida, Oklahoma. And so, like you said, I expect some similar chaos this week. So thank you once again for everyone who tuned in. This is the new SC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. Until next time.